Hello everyone! Kamusta mga ka-Adarians? Mga ka-spacers, ka-YouTubers, ka-metas joining us today. So much to talk about. There's the ICC issue. There's of course, congratulations! Andyan na yung Maharlika Sovereign Wealth Fund Golden Era Pilipinas. Yan, nasign na rin. So it's official. Meron na tayong National Sovereign Wealth Fund. Pwede rin natin pag-usapan yan. But let me, for the sake of focus, no? Dito muna tayo sa issue ng Duterte's return to China. Obviously, alam natin na officially speaking, hindi natin alam yung unofficially. Officially speaking, almost half a dozen times pumunta si former President Duterte sa China when he was the President of the Republic of the Philippines, or more accurately, Mayor President of the Philippines. Pero ngayon, private citizen na po siya, hindi na siya nag-hold ng any elected office, not even on the provincial level where he used to be really embedded in for decades and decades before being catapulted to the pinnacle of power and becoming the demagogue in Malacanang for 6 years. Malaking tanong yan, bakit nandyan sa China si Duterte, no? Hindi naman siya elected official, di naman siya Department of Foreign Affairs official. Last time I checked, he's not also a special envoy by President Marcos Jr., nor is he a special advisor on foreign policy issues. In fact, more importantly, pag-usapan natin yan, he has been very critical of Marcos Jr.'s foreign policy when it comes to the US-China dynamic, particularly dun sa issue ng EDCA. So pag-usapan natin yan. Some of course are saying na may relasyon ang nangyayari ngayon on that front and the ICC issue. Of course, may mga conspiracy theories, or some would say advanced mag-isip theories, kung saan sinasabi na baka naman yung iba dyan may interest na maghanap ng beshies or retouch base dun sa kanilang mga beshies or amos or strategic partners, kung medyo may concern na baka ma-ICC kayo dyan, diba? So, I don't know. I'm not gonna vouch for that kind of argument, but it's something quite interesting. Is it a coincidence na just as we were waiting for the ICC decision dun sa appeal ng Philippine government to reconsider its jurisdiction on the extrajudicial killings issues under the former administration, habang fina-follow natin yung development na yan, ayan, boom, meron din tayong mga updates. It's official na po, talagang bumisita si Duterte dun sa China and was greeted by not only foreign policy chief and former foreign minister Wang Yi, not only by the vice president of China, but by no less than paramount leader Xi Jinping. It's a big deal. It's a big deal that a private citizen not holding any official or important unofficial or semi-official position has been granted audience by no less than one of the most powerful men on earth. Some would say number 2, some would say number 3, some would say, in fact, potentially the most powerful man on earth, Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping po, ito po yung paramount leader of China. He's not just the president, he's not just the head of the Communist Party in China, he's not only the head of the Central Military Commission, he's considered as the most powerful Chinese leader since Mao Zedong, and definitely yung title na paramount leader perfectly applies pag pinag-usapan natin si Xi Jinping. So, big deal po yan, big deal po yan. I am yet to hear a comprehensive account by the Department of Foreign Affairs or a response by President Marcos Jr. on the nature of this visit. Was this fully coordinated with the Philippine government? Fully. I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, pare, dadaan ako dyan, just in case. No. Was this fully coordinated? Will there be debriefing? Pagbalik ni Pangulong Duterte, is he gonna debrief President Marcos Jr., the cabinet, relevant agencies, elected officials on the nature of his conversations to make sure na hindi ito labag sa ating national interest, that national security considerations remain intact? Will there be a debriefing on potentially some compromise points or some cooperative initiatives, tangible cooperative initiatives that we can pursue with China in spite of our disagreements on the EDCA issue, which in itself has not been settled, katulad ng mga sinusulat natin over the past year or so, no? So, let's talk about this. Very important yan, very important yan. Of course, sinasabi naman ng mga critics and conspiracy theorists, no, this is all about ICC, naghanap ng exile options yung isa dyan. before going there, let's talk about this. Okay. Okay. Now, ayon sa mga supporters ng dating Pangulo, ayon sa mga ka-DDS dyan, yan, kamusta naman dyan, banat bay, okay. This is a good thing, ayon sa kanila. This is a form of supposed backdoor or shuttle diplomacy na dapat magpasalamat tayo na pumunta si Tatay Digong sa China dahil tumutulong siya in de-escalation of tensions and restoration of better relationship with China. And by the way, just to look at this, ito po yung mga statements, no, na officially lumabas dun sa meeting. We don't know what else was discussed. We were not there. I don't know what what really was discussed there. But ito yung mahalaga, no. So sinabi ni Chinese paramount leader, he's not just the president, he's the paramount leader. That's the correct way of putting it. He called on former President Duterte to, quote, play an important role, unquote, dun sa promotion of bilateral relationship. In fact, paramount leader of China also praised President Duterte's approach to China and his China and foreign policy when he was in power. The development of the two countries is rooted in the good neighborly and friendly peripheral environment and the Asian family of win-win cooperation ayon kay Paramount Leader Xi Jinping dun sa kanyang meeting with former President Duterte. Sabi niya, I hope you will continue to play an important role in the friendly cooperation between the two countries. And of course, there was also praise for how President Duterte handled bilateral relations when he was in power. Obviously, bakit naman hindi ka matuwa when President Duterte was, in charge, because, that was the best of times for China. We did not assert the arbitration award with distance from the United States. I mean, there's a logic to distancing from the United States. I don't want us to be reliant on that. But distancing from US and distancing from international law just when wala tayong leverage when dealing with China, well, we know what happened, right? No concessions whatsoever in West Philippine Sea. He was taken for a ride dun sa promises of $24-30 billion of investment, whatever. Nasaan na sila, right? Ayan, taken for a ride. So, obviously, these were the best of times for China, and they're very much grateful to Duterte when he was in charge. But the supporters would say this is important. We need backdoor diplomacy because as far as President Marcos is concerned, baka hindi masyadong natuwa mga China sa kanya dahil sa kanyang EDCA policy. And let me just give you a little bit of an overview of backdoor channel diplomacy. So, this is not the first time. Ito assuming tama yung sinasabi ng mga Duterte supporters na this was some sort of a special envoy mission, some sort of a backdoor diplomacy mission, fine. Assuming that's true, although I'm very doubtful that's the case, this is not the first time we had that. In fact, Marcos Jr. should know a lot about this. Back in 1974, Marcos Jr. himself, makikita niyo dito sa picture na yan, Bongbong Marcos, together with his mom, Imelda Marcos, the former First Lady, actually they did their own backdoor diplomacy when they visited Beijing ahead of ahead of Marcos Sr.'s official visit more than a week-long to China in the mid-1970s, kung saan nag-normalize na tayo ng bilateral relations at the height of Cold War. Obviously, the 1974 backdoor diplomacy was very, very popular, or some would say infamous, for many reasons. But some would say, of course, this was the very iconic moment when Mao Zedong hinalikan niya yung kamay ni Imelda Marcos as a sign of respect and affection. And some would say that played a very important role in smoothing the way or paving the way for the normalization of bilateral ties. Of course, more astute observers would say, well, that normalization would have had happened regardless dahil ang Nixon administration together with Kissinger already were normalizing ties with China a year or two earlier, right? In fact, in the early 1970s pa lang, the normalization process between US and China was happening because they wanted to have a common front against Soviet Union. So Marcos Sr., was just following, the script. But in fairness, I would say that meeting was important. You could say that, it's not a small deal for back then a young Bongbong Marcos to meet no less than the great Hellsman, Mao Zedong. There were also many cases of backdoor diplomacy back in the day. You had, the Marcos family here. You see in this picture with the suave Fidel Castro with his Cuban cigar in his mouth, riding a jeep, right? You can see Amy Marcos there behind. You can see Imelda Marcos there, very fashionista, very stylish. There was also, of course, the meeting also between Imelda Marcos and back then Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, because Muammar Gaddafi never tried to assume any official position. No? So Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, you also had that. This was supposedly crucial dun sa Tripoli Agreement, which paved the way for some sort of diplomacy, peace process negotiations in light of the war in Mindanao situation that erupted during the Marcos era. No, so shuttle diplomacy is nothing new, no, and some would argue that some of these shuttle diplomacy cases were quite successful, especially during the Marcos Sr. period. More recently, also at shuttle diplomacy, for instance, or backdoor diplomacy when okay, wait lang, bakit ito yung lumakas? When Mar Rojas was designated as a special envoy by former President, late President Aquino, to meet his Chinese counterpart back then, incoming leader Xi Jinping. So this is a picture, pinag-usapan natin yan. As I said, if ever lang Mar Rojas becomes the foreign secretary, I mean, it's not very probable, but if ever that happens, don't be surprised, because, I mean, that guy has also some experience. That meeting actually went quite well, based on the information we have. Very good rapport between the two next generation leaders back then. Of course, in the case of Xi Jinping, he would become soon one of the most powerful leaders in the world. In the case of Mao as well, it turned out quite differently. Ibang usapan na yan. But so we have a lot of backdoor diplomacy cases, and a lot of them were successful. But some of them were not so successful, and some of them ended up very controversial. Case in point, the Trillanes trip to China. Right? The Trillanes trip to China. Until now, to be honest, I didn't get a final definitive account of what really happened when Trillanes visited China dun sa at the height of the Scarborough crisis. I get very different answers depending on who I talk to, including you can check on YouTube my interview with former Senator Trillanes. He has his own explanation. You can check also on YouTube my interview with Admiral Ong, who was in Navy, Philippine Navy, and in charge of the Western Command during the Scarborough. He has his own version. You talk to Arroyo, you talk to Enrile, they will have their own version on this issue. And you remember, there was very, very heated argument between Enrile and Trillanes back in the day after Trillanes made the supposed mutual or tried to supposedly mediate between Philippines and China during the Scarborough Shoal. Now, the next thing that happened was not very encouraging, and I think that explains why the episode is still very controversial, because supposedly daw, meron tayong mutual disengagement kung saan yung Gregorio del Pilar natin, ilabas natin dyan sa lagoon, at expect natin yung mga Chino maglabas din sila ng kanilang mga vessels dyan sa Scarborough Shoal. In fact, except it happened on our side, it didn't happen on their side. Next thing you know, naka-blame game na. And nagka-heart attack pa yata yung ambassador natin sa China. No? I mean, those are really messy times. So, whether you're with Senator Trillanes or not with Senator Trillanes, the fact of the matter is that that was a very controversial episode. Until now, we're still debating whether that backdoor diplomacy helped the situation or not. If you're supportive of Trillanes, you would say, well, at least it prevented the military escalation. Others would have a very, very different take on this, no? And as you remember, during that back and forth between Enrile and Trillanes, I think you can find it on YouTube. That letter T word was thrown around a lot. All right, you know what I'm referring to, no? Okay. So the idea of backdoor diplomacy is not new. It's something that we have been doing decade after decade after decade during our bilateral relations with China, whether it's Maoist China, whether it's post-Maoist China, whether it's during Aquino period, whether it's during Marcos Sr. period. Some were more successful, or at least not as controversial, and some turned out as quite controversial, if not also quite unsuccessful, right? Depending on how you want to read the situation. It's still very, very controversial. So ang tanong ngayon is, was the Duterte visit to China most recently? He's a private citizen. He's not holding any official position. He's not even a neophyte senator, as Trillanes was back in the day. No, he's not. He doesn't have any elected position. He's not even a special envoy of the president. So what is he doing there? Was this coordinated with the Department of Foreign Affairs? Was there a pre-departure briefing? Would there be a post-departure briefing? How do we make sure that that meeting was reflective of the Philippine national interest and the foreign policy of the current democratically elected administration and the current president, who's the commander-in-chief, rather than reflection of factional, personal, or who knows what kind of interest out there? Now, as I said, assuming this was sanctioned by President Marcos Jr., let's see. You could make an argument that, well, if it helps with the escalation of disputes, then so be it. But the other side of the argument is this. Whether this was sanctioned or not, the optics is not good. It makes Marcos look, fill in the gap, right? Who's the president in the Philippines? Why would China want to talk to an ex-president who's directly criticizing and challenging the key policies of the current president, right? Case in point, Duterte stands on EDCA. So Marcos Jr. on multiple occasions, sinabi ni Marcos Jr. na hindi gagamitin ng Amerika yung EDCA bases or sites for offensive military operations against China. And yet, when Duterte talks, he says that almost the opposite. He says that the Americans are supposedly gonna even, preposition nuclear weapons? I mean, that's crazy. But that's his position. So, you have an ex-president who's not on the same page as the current president, particularly on this very divisive issue of Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. Ang paniniwala ng dating Pangulo natin is that EDCA is not good for the country, is that the EDCA will drag us into a war between US and China. I completely disagree with that point of view, but that's his point of view, and I don't see how that can be reconciled with the position of the current president. So my sense is, Aquino would sanction Rojas or deputize him to do special envoy because they have similar points of view, right? Marcos Sr. would deputize his wife and his son to do Backdoor channel because they're one family. They trust each other. They're on the same page. Now, I don't understand how a current president would sanction a former president when they are on completely different page on key issues. Except, as I said, if there's some sort of a good cop, bad cop situation going on there. Or, and this brings me to a third perspective. So I'm trying to be fair here. So I'm showing you guys different sides, different ways of looking at this issue. A third perspective could be this. The third perspective would be that even Marcos Jr. himself is not 100% sure what he wants to do with this China question. Medyo nahihirapan na siya. Because on one hand, yes, nakikita niya. Ito po yung gusto ng taong bayan, okay? Kasi nakikita ko yung mga pro-tatay dyan, parang sabi, popular si tatay, popular si tatay. Well, hindi popular yung kanyang policies when it comes to China, alright? Very clearly, super majority of Filipinos want the government to take a tougher stance on China. Nakita natin year after year after year after year. Pulse Asia also showed that the vast majority of Filipinos want to build stronger alliances with our partners, hindi mo nagbubuli sa atin, to defend our interests in the West Philippine Sea. For instance, look at this case. 80% of Filipinos, and this is in one survey recently said, that, 4 out of 5 Filipinos said we should form alliances with countries ready to help us to defend our interests in the West Philippine Sea. So, ito po yung gusto ng taong bayan. This is not very much on the same page as what the former president was saying. In fact, interestingly, many Filipinos, more than almost half of Filipinos back in the day, said they were not happy with how the former president was handling foreign policy, right? Let me bring it out. So let's put things into context. Duterte may have been popular on some issues, but not on the foreign policy West Philippine Sea issue. That's absolutely clear in the same surveys that some of the pro-tatay club want to cite to say, oh, he's popular, therefore we should listen to him. It's like, no, he does not reflect the view of vast majority of Filipinos when it comes to the China question. That's absolutely true. I know it for a fact also because I have had many acquaintances, right, who were pro-Tigong for some issues, but not really not on foreign policy. So this is another survey. Look at it. SWS, 47% of adult Filipinos believe that the government was not doing enough in the West Philippine Sea dispute during the Duterte era. Again, I'm showing this to you. I'll also post a link there. So the Filipino people have spoken. 4 out of 5 Filipinos, and sometimes more than 90% in some other surveys said we should take a tougher stance in the West Philippine Sea, which is almost exactly opposite of what someone else was saying. Yung jet ski boy. Someone else was saying na wala tayong magagawa. I mean, okay, let's be even more. Let's quote it as it is, okay? Ito yung sinabi. Okay, let's be meek and humble to get their mercy. I mean, what kind of president says something like that? Let's remain meek and humble to get mercy of another power. I mean, in what universe is that an independent foreign policy, okay? All right, on that note, as I said, there could be 3 different options. One is actually this was quietly green-lighted by President Marcos. and there's some degree of coordination. The second one is that, well, this is a direct challenge to the mandate of the president, and this could potentially enable a strategy of divide and conquer by you know who. But a third perspective would be this: Marcos Jr. is wishy-washy, ambivalent about how to proceed with China because he also has not yet decided on the contours of EDCA. For instance, hindi natin alam gaano kalaki yung maging size ng mga American troops na magkaroon ng rotational access dyan sa EDCA. Hindi natin alam ano mga weapon systems ilagay nila. Patriot missile systems, sabi nga ni Digong, baka nuclear weapons pa. Oh, well, bawal yun. But you get what I'm saying, right? Those things matter. And EDCA is inherently flexible, so it can be adjusted. So nothing is final and set in stone when it comes to EDCA. So it's also possible that because Marcos Jr. is still feeling the stones while he's crossing the river, to use the kind of a Deng Xiaoping kind of metaphor, maybe a part of him is actually even okay with Duterte going there and seeing how we can de-escalate tensions. Because, and then, there's the fourth perspective. Medyo conspiracy theory na yan na baka may angle yan ng ICC because you know that there was a ruling today na, and I think many people expected that the ICC will insist on having jurisdiction on the EJK issues in the past because clearly, as many would see, if you have tens of thousands or even thousands per PNP numbers of suspected EJK cases, and then you have how many ilan ulit ang na-convict or na talagang na-investiga, well, there's a huge issue on capacity, but more importantly, willingness. You can check my podcast, my interview with Attorney Carranza, among others, to look into the details of that, and you can research also about this issue. But anyway, for me, this was very important. This shows that the Philippine foreign policy is still not set in stone. Everything's up for grabs. But I really, really wonder, ano ba talaga ang stance ni Marcos Jr. dito? Gusto niya ba ito? Ayaw niya ba ito? Because the optics, to be honest, is not very nice. I don't think it's really looking good on Marcos, that you have someone who has very divergent position on EDCA and some of the key issues of the current administration, going on and doing his own, well, private citizen diplomas, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, right? I don't know what's going on there. Let's wait for Marcos. I have my hunch, but I'll keep it to myself. But let's see what's going on there. Ako naman, my sense is, yes, the optics is not good. That's why Marcos has to come out and make it clear. He's the president. He has the final say on foreign policy. And whatever has been discussed out there, well, he's following what the Filipino people want, which is strong alliances, strong stance on the West Philippine Sea. But at the same time, ganito kasi, Marcos also wants to have robust bilateral economic relations with China. Something that I also support. I want us to have a good diplomatic economic relations with China, but not at the expense of the West Philippine Sea. Not in a Tatay-style way, which clearly didn't work. He got zero concessions in the West Philippine Sea. Things got worse. Where are the big-ticket infrastructure projects from China? Hindi nangyari yan. So let's see what's going on. But I'll be honest, this is not being interpreted very nicely by the international community. I know that because I deal with international media. I'm seeing and I'm quoting and I'm writing on this issue. It's not looking nice. So I think Marcos has to come out clear. If he really sanctioned this, if there was a coordination with Duterte on this, then he has to come out and say, like, this is a part of diplomacy. And since President Duterte had a good relationship with China, we appreciate his contribution. Well, my sense is Marcos Jr. will really say that at some point because ayaw niya ng away. But if that's really the case, I don't know. Let's see. Because yun nga parang ang ayaw ko talaga mangyari dito is yung idea na ma-divide and conquer tayo. Ayaw ko mangyari yan. Ayoko rin yung impression na sabog ang foreign policy natin. Ayoko mangyari yan because I want the Philippines to look united, strong, determined, and principled. And let's be honest, whether you like Marcos Jr. or not, as I said, to put it roughly, he's 80% Aquino, 20% Duterte on foreign policy. Ibang usapan na yung corruption, etc. Ibang usapan na yan, alright? Yung issue ng corruption, yung issue ng human rights, ibang usapan na yan. Probably could say it's the reverse. Right? But on the foreign policy issue, it's really 80-20. Why? He continued EDCA, which is an Aquino era policy. He even expanded that, by the way. And also, he reaffirmed the finality of the arbitration award. Again, that's an Aquino era position, not a Duterte position. So why would he have Duterte as his special envoy? Well, connect the dots. I already gave you some potential answers to that or ways to see it along those lines. Will I vouch for that? I don't know. You can see where I stand on the issue. My stance is this. I want the Philippines to look strong, unified, and also coherent in its foreign policy. I know it's more aspiration than reality, but we have to try. We have to try. Otherwise, we'll be looked at as a banana republic. And I don't want that to happen. We have to look strong. Yan, sige na nga, I'll say it. Unity. Kailangan natin unity for the good reason. Unity on the West Philippine Sea. Unity for Filipino patriotism. Unity for the Philippine interest. National interest. Yun po yung mahalaga. Yun po yung dapat focus natin. So, I fervently hope this visit by President Duterte contributes to the de-escalation of tensions. I also fervently hope this helps the Philippines better protect its interests in the West Philippine Sea, not the other way around. And I also hope that President Marcos Jr. makes it absolutely clear that the current elected government has the final say on foreign policy. And so far, as far as the Marcos Jr. foreign policy is concerned, to put it roughly, it's 80% Aquino, 20% Duterte. Why 20% Duterte? Because Marcos Jr. is also a bit wishy-washy on how deep he wants to go in his cooperation with the Americans in ways that Aquino was not. Because Marcos Jr. more than Aquino appreciates the value of Chinese economic and investment relationship with the Philippines. But on EDCA, on arbitration issue, on the West Philippine Sea issue, he's far more Aquino than Duterte. Now, depending on where you stand on the political spectrum, pick your pick your side. But for me, as a patriot, my position is very clear. We have to defend the West Philippine Sea as much as we have to pursue the best possible relations with all our neighbors and friends and powers. Yes, including China. But our red lines have to be absolutely clear. On that note, thank you very much. Balik na ako sa Tito Duties. I really appreciate you folks joining us. Again, these are tough issues. These are sensitive issues. But please, let's not make this about Dilao, Pula, BBM, lawyers. This is about our national interest. This is about Philippines looking strong. This is about Philippines protecting the basics, our core interest. And as I said, for 6 years, we were bullied by no less than we were warmonger tagged, we were gaslighted. Why? Because all we wanted is to follow international law and stand our ground in the West Philippine Sea. Well, guess what? That's what Indonesia does. Look at what Jokowi did in North Natuna Sea. Guess what? That's what Malaysia has been doing, especially since Mahathir returned to power in 2019, and that has been carried over to the current administrations. Guess what? That's what South Korea is doing in the Yellow Sea. Guess what? I can go on and on and on. All of our key neighbors are doing hedging, balancing, and doing patriotic strategy in dealing with their maritime disputes with China. If we do that, there will be no war. If we do that, we will have more respect. If we do it properly, not only will we get more respect, but we can have the best possible relations while our red lines is clear. If you're weak, you'll be taken advantage of. If you're weak, you invite contempt. When you're strong and when you're prepared to stand your ground, you deter bullying. And that is why we do what we do. Now, dun sa mga ibang ignoramos na nakikinig, I don't know kung kaninong mga bloggers, propagandists, whatever, na alam natin na please check the basic facts. Basic facts on the arbitration award. The arbitration case was important, as I said, on 3 levels. First, hindi na ginagamit ng China yung 9-dash line. Guess why? Because it's now a legal laughingstock. They tried to pull off another one they called Forsha. I'm sure you haven't heard about it because, again, no one took it seriously. Number 2, the Philippine Arbitration Award provided a pretext, legal international law pretext, for not only our allies, but a whole number of countries, including India, among others, to expand their naval presence to make sure yung West Philippines and South China Sea will not be dominated by one country. And And third, and most importantly, dahil sa ating arbitration award, na pressure not only yung mga domestic na pero bating ASEAN na hindi magmambo-jumbo doon sa code of conduct natin with China. Because alam natin there were efforts to make the code of conduct between ASEAN and China something that reflects a non-modern international law point of view. But because of the arbitration award, the Vietnamese, the Indonesians, the Malaysians can clearly argue that any legally binding code of conduct will have to reflect international law and by effect reflect the Philippine arbitration victory in 2016. On that note, mabuhay ang Pilipinas. Maraming salamat. Whoever you supported in the past, whoever you voted in the past, I don't care. What's important here is yung dangal ng ating bayan. Please lang, yun lang isipin nyo, yung dignidad at dangal ng ating bayan. That's what at stake here. If we cannot preserve the basic dignity of our nation, anong klase tayong tao. Yun lang naman talaga eh. On that note, thank you very much. God bless and mabuhay ang Pilipinas.